Hi and welcome to Z Games. Recorded live at 4ZZZ Studios in Brisbane and broadcast nationally over the Community Radio Network, Z Games brings you the latest gaming news, reviews and interviews from across Australia and around the world.
Hello, welcome to Z Games, Australia's favourite gaming radio program. My name is Razor, with you for another week, and I'm joined by my awesome co-hosts. Firstly, Mr. Jody McGregor.
Hello.
Ms. Candy Payne.
Hi everyone.
And the Major Lee.
Yeah.
Major Lee, we're
So
trying that
excited.
again.
Always a pleasure to be here on the show with you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Razor.
Now, we have a terrific show lined up for you guys. We'll be reviewing The Walking Dead Season 2. Jody and I have been playing it.
Yep.
We've shed tears,
Yeah,
haven't
we've
we?
dried our eyes now. Obviously,
Yes.
we're better, but we may break at any moment.
But we also have a couple of guests who will be joining us. Firstly, Emily and Tom, who are a part of Street Reads, which is a cool little choose-your-own-adventure activity that's happening as a part of the Writers' Festival this week.
That's right. For the next 2 weeks, you can walk around Brisbane having adventures in the street. You find posters and then you scan them with your phone and you get the next bit of the adventure. But we'll talk about that later on.
Awesome, but let's kick this episode off, as usual, with the week in gaming news headlines. Miss Candy Payne?
Thank you, Razor. Valve, the company behind leading digital distribution platform Steam, is being sued by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. The ACCC alleges that Valve is breaching consumer laws that entitle consumers to a full refund if a product is found to be defective or faulty. Steam, which only sells games to Australians online, has a long-standing policy of not allowing refunds and does not place itself under any obligation to repair or replace defective games. In a statement to Kotaku, a spokesperson for Valve said, "We are making every effort to cooperate with the Australian officials on this matter while continuing to provide Steam services to our customers across the world, including Australian gamers."
There are a few people. I know someone who actually did manage to get a refund out of Steam for a game that they'd pre-ordered and then changed their mind on. But you have to jump through a million hoops and hassle them, and then at the end of it, they send an email saying, "This is the last time you'll get a refund."
Yeah.
So that's not really how the law works in Australia. You
No.
can't tell people, only this once will we treat you fairly.
Yeah, no, I've tried and, refused. It just didn't play. I thought that was it was defective, but anyway. Changes made to the Classification Act this week will make it easier for developers to get their games classified for Australian release in the future. Under the current system, every single game needs to be submitted to the board and reviewed for classification, a process that is both time-consuming and expensive. The amendment to the Classification Act enables developers to use online tools to classify their own games. No system is currently in place to take advantage of these laws, but paves the way for a more efficient classification system in the future.
So they almost got it to work.
It's in beta.
Yeah.
Well, the recommendation came through, I think, 2 or 3 years ago for this to happen, just because of the sheer volume of content that's coming through. I
Yeah.
mean, there's something like 16 people in an office who have to play every single game that comes out in Australia. I mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I don't think it's even playing. What's happened in the past, and I think is still the case, is that the developers have to send in a recording of every single moment in the video game, which is kind of impossible these days if you're doing things where there's a lot of stuff that just emerges out of the systems at play. And so, that's absurd. Like something that's like a 300-hour video game, and then you've got to send a tape of that to a bureaucrat so that they can watch it and then determine, what age group this belongs to.
Yeah, and not to mention if you just got like a puzzle game or something with baubles jumping around, it's like going to be rated G anyway, and there's no reason for it to be classified or reviewed for any sort of objectionable content.
Yep.
And then you have to pay $800 to $1,200 just for them to look at it. And if they need someone to come in and do like further review, they charge extra. You wind up having to pay $2,500 for your game to get rated. And if you're just making that cheap bouncing bauble puzzle game, that's not really cost effective.
So nice try. I hope they hook these two systems up at some point.
And finally, the full uncensored version of Left 4 Dead 2 has been reclassified for release in Australia. The original version was censored upon its release in 2009 due to the fact that Australia did not have an 18+ rating for video games at that time.
About time.
Yeah. So that would have required sending in another videotape of the same game.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you guys play the censored version that came out here in Australia?
No, it was rubbish.
I
Yeah.
played both versions because there are ways around it. And
You're a criminal.
well, I did. I also got a promo copy from before for a review.
Oh, I see.
But there are also ways around it, and it's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. Like it's silly that bodies just sort of suddenly vanish, but it didn't actually ruin the game or make it horrendously unplayable. It just took away the impact. So you would shoot a million things and then they would all be gone. You didn't have that feeling afterwards where you look out on the devastation and go, man, the world is screwed, and then feel bad. So all it did was take away the consequences
great.
of your violence. You can still shoot all those guys.
Mission accomplished. Well done, ratings board.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week in Gaming News Headlines. Next up, we'll be hearing all about street reads. At the start of the show, what did we hear, Jody?
We heard Red by Hyuna.
And here's one from local artist Slato, and it's called Stepping Disc Chase.
Now, we're going to be talking to a couple of guests about the Street Reads projects. We have Emily Craven, the producer, and Tom Doulemond, one of the writers of this year's Street Reads project. And full disclosure, I'm one of the other writers. We're games journalists, so obviously we're completely corrupt. But
Giving the game away, man.
oh, sorry.
Someone else gave that away.
I already got my Doritos. I don't care what happens now.
Oh, fine.
Emily, can you explain to us what the Street Reads project is about and how you originally came up with it?
Yeah, so Street Reads, in essence, is basically a real-life choose-your-own-adventure. So what happens is the story happens in the locations where you're standing. So basically you all start at a single start location. So there are 2 locations this year. Last year there was only 1. So they start in either Redcliffe Place outside the Brisbane Square Library or at the State Library of Queensland. And what happens is that you get given a scenario and then you're given 3 different choices as to 3 different stories that you can take a part of. So in one you can become a pirate captain who waltzes around Brisbane looking for their pirate crew.
That one sounds terrible and like an idiot wrote it.
Yeah.
7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No stars.
I noticed how you sort of upped it kind of above the 5 level there, Jody.
Obviously.
We're games journalists. We don't go below 7.
It's the Metacritic score.
Yeah.
That's right. And the other one, we have you are walking around Brisbane, or a virtual reality of Brisbane, with a couple of AIs trying to remake the buildings that surround you. That's Tom's story over here. And then we also have one which is kind of a combination of Matthew Riley and Mutant Cockroaches, written by another author who wasn't able to be here today because he's waltzing around Scotland, and his name's Gary Campbell.
So how are these stories delivered to the adventurers?
So basically the way it works is we have 47 posters scattered around Brisbane. So these posters are A3 size, and most of them are on Brisbane City Council bins or on pavement posters. And what happens is that each of these posters has a different artwork, basically depicting the fiction that is going on in the story, sort of merging it as part of the location. And on each poster there is a QR code. So QR codes are those sort of square barcodes that you like see on Pepsi cans and on marketing posters and those sorts of things. And what happens is that you can get a free QR code reader from any app store, and what you do is you scan the code and it takes you to a website. And so on the website for Street Reads we have not only the stories, but we also have voiceover narration and a soundtrack that actually goes with the story, and then as well as the illustrations. And so what happens is that you read the story in the location where you're standing, and then you get given choices as to where to go next. And each part of the story is actually set in a location that is a really cool little feature of Brisbane. You know, you don't want to be walking around standing on street corners and things like that. You know, it's a bit of a boring way to do a game. So you scan the posters, you get given choices, and then you pick the next one and you keep going all the way to the end. And while you're doing the adventure, we are also getting participants to actually take photographs. So for the pirate adventure, you are taking photographs to try and find the best pirate flag. In the adventure with the AIs, you're taking photographs of various different architectures and tagging them as either being part of the sort of the chaos AI or the AI that really likes structure. Or you're taking taking photographs of potential roach nests to help them identify, you know, how to get rid of these cockroaches. And so the idea is that not only are you taking these photographs as a way to take part in the story, but also you get to win prizes for posting them.
So, Tom, you are a writer of the VR story. How was it? A lot of fun going around Brisbane and creating a story in your mind, like using landmarks around the place to further enhance your story?
It was a lot of fun. It was actually a bit of an eye-opener. I've lived in Brisbane for many years now, and I don't live in the city and I don't work in the city anymore. And because my story is really about part of the brief was that it had to relate to the Brisbane Writers' Festival, and they had a theme of gaming this year. So I thought, okay, it's a game, and as you move through the game, fighting for one or the other sides of the two antagonists in the game, the city becomes more structured or less structured around you. So I had to move the positions to older parts of the city or fancier, newer parts of the city. And I was looking up a lot, and it gave me a really like a new appreciation for all the amazing buildings around Brisbane, which sounds ridiculous, but it's very visually striking, and it made me feel like, despite the difficulty of writing an adventure with 8 different endings that anyone could participate in without feeling left out, it was really rewarding. So, and none of us have really seen the final products. Jodie and Gary and I wrote stories and ran around and helped with poster placement, but we've not heard the music, the voiceovers, and the finals yet. So
It's because I destroyed all your stories.
Ruined our work.
I've been paid. I don't care anymore. Burn it all to the ground.
So it's a choose your own. Sorry, Lee. It's a choose your own adventure story. So you get to choose your own path. Can you give us an example of how your story branches depending on the choice that you make?
For me, particularly, I focused on the architecture. So my concept is you upload it into a virtual simulation of Brisbane for a tour, and it's not working, and 2 programs have escaped. One really likes structure, just to simplify it, and one really likes chaos. I don't make either of them better or worse, because you as the player have to decide which way to go. And you have choices to either further the goals of one or the other, or to try and synthesize the two. And so, for example, you might when you first start. I don't want to give anything away, but it'll say, "Oh well, there is a problem. There is a commotion from this part, from say Elizabeth Street or something," and then your companion, a little guidance robot, says, "Well, we should go here to fix it," i.e., to make the thing a bit more structured, or we should check out the sounds over there. And depending on how you move through the story, you are surrounded by the skyscrapers and uniform world, or you end up at like the Treasury Casino and everything's really classically sculptured around you.
So writing a choose your own adventure story, a branching narrative must be difficult enough, but how do you tie that then into the fact that the audience is going to be moving around, and that you're tying each chapter of it to a different location? The
biggest difficulty I found was trying to target the audience. You just don't know, right? There's a group participant option. You can go singly. You don't know what age group you're targeting at. I think mine was G-rated or something like that. I don't know what gender. I don't want to say, hey, you run down the road so that people who can't run feel excluded. It's actually quite difficult. The benefit was that my story was fundamentally about the buildings around you. So as I walked through Brisbane on several trips, I kind of flagged, I think, about 30 spots out of the 15 that we need for the story. And then thought to myself, how can this fit into the story? How can this represent, again, as a game, I can say, well, this is 80% structure and 20% chaos, or 50-50, and I could use that to help you kind of move around. My idea was that in the end location for one of the 8 endings, I think each story ends up being about 2,500 words, you can look around you and feel as though you've made a difference to this virtual Brisbane. which is kind of cool, having test played it myself. It really was more
or
like
wondering
software.
if you really have left said virtual Brisbane.
Oh, also, like, it's actually, after you come up with 3 cool endings, and you're like, yeah, this is great, and then you have to come up with 5 other ones that are equally as cool, it gets a little bit, it was actually really difficult.
You know, Tom was the only one of my writers who I've ever had who didn't just use Google Street View. He actually walked around at least 5 or 6 times, and in some cases was holding his laptop while typing said story.
Wow.
So you have to have been one of the most dedicated people, because when I wrote my Choose Your Own Adventure several years ago, I certainly wasn't that dedicated.
A drawback we discovered when we put the posters up was that after using Google Street Views to find the bin where the poster would be, and after spending a month walking around finding all the bins and writing the story from the point of view of standing next to the bin, we discovered the bin was gone.
Yes.
And we had to
bins were
move the
gone.
entire thing about 80 metres down the road. Now, because of what I said before, that I've already been paid and everything's been recorded, I didn't have that usual artist's moment where it's all ruined. Nothing will work, because when you look across the street, it's not how I described it.
Well,
so
I mean,
I cried on the inside and I got
I mean,
over
at
myself.
least you didn't have it as bad as Gary. I mean, Gary had set one of his locations in the Shrine of Remembrance, which was supposed to undergo renovations in 2015, and that has been accelerated to now. So we've had to move his location entirely.
Oh, wow.
So there are those sorts of things that you sort of get impacted on it, and though we try to write these stories so that they have longevity, the problem is that you have to keep constant eye on the locations and making sure that you know that mural that you're referencing isn't all of a sudden painted over and made a bland black.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd think you'd be safe with the eternal flame. It's in the name. It's going to be there forever.
It's still on fire, you just can't see it.
That's right.
Okay, we're talking about Street Read, which is an event happening this week as a part of the Brisbane Writers Festival. We're going to continue talking about it when we return on Z Games. This song is by Jake Kaufman. It's called Steal Thy Shovel. You are listening to Z Games on 4ZZZ. We are still talking to Tom and Emily of Street Reads happening this week. It's a augmented reality game where you run around Brisbane in a choose-your-own adventure in either a pirate or a virtual reality cyber kind of adventure.
And there's another one in which you fight evil cockroaches.
Evil cockroaches.
Yeah, they have like acid that eats your brains.
So there's an audio component to the story as well, so it's best experienced with headphones, I guess.
Yeah, so headphones are really helpful, although I know that a lot of people like to do street reads as a group and sort of do it as a group consensus thing. So sometimes it's good to bring along maybe like, those little foldable speakers from Typo or whatever, just to sort of help with the hearing things above traffic noise. But you'll get the full experience, particularly of the music in the background of the narration if you have your headphones.
Or a boombox.
Or a boombox, that would be amazing.
Yes.
Amps at every council bin.
That'd be great.
I'd like to hear more about the pirate adventure. Now, our own Jody here is the author of the pirate adventure. What can you tell us about it?
Nepotism.
Oh no! I totally picked Jody because I knew he was a journalist. I was like, this guy's going to be a good asset. I don't care how he writes, just as long as I get on 4ZZZ.
Yeah, well,
The huge boost to your profile
yeah.
you get from
Joke's on
community
you.
radio.
Now you're on 4ZZZ. So
Now, Jody, there's a reason your story is PG rated.
Yeah, it is about pirates, but I did try to make it that sort of pugwash level. Kids love pirates.
Yeah.
So I put in rum but left out sodomy and the lash. I tried to keep it to a certain tone that
you don't want
children
people
would
to
be
think
able
that
appreciate.
you've got a theme either with your other writings.
I would really like to see people dress up for Jody's story. Actually, I'd like to see people like walking around with peg legs and like pirate patches around Brisbane.
So I guess you use the Brisbane River, Jody? Is that too obvious? Or?
Yeah, the Brisbane River is involved.
Spoiler
yes.
alert.
But I did find a lot of nautical themed locations around Brisbane. Like Tom, I learned a lot about places around the city that I didn't know beforehand. There's a cannon in the Treasury Park casino, right behind Treasury Casino. There's an old cannon there, and so obviously that's a cannon that you need for your pirate ship now. And there is on Charlotte Street an exhibit called Waterography that I had no idea was there. It's just on the facade of one of the apartment buildings. And if you look at it from the right angle, especially at night, it resembles like this underwater scene. There's bubbles and it's sort of wavy. So I worked that in. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff around Brisbane, not just the river, that fit my story quite well.
How far do these stories spread? And I mean, like physical distance. Like if you're starting, at the State Library at South Bank, and then you end up through the city. Like what distance are we covering in kilometres?
Because we are very lazy.
Well, no, I'm just like curious to know. You've just mentioned a few places I'm not aware of, so I'm just wondering how far people have to walk.
Well, it depends on the story and the choices. Mine spreads over a chunk of the CBD. And South Bank, but depending how you go, it's sort of optimized so that you don't have to take that full spread. So if you cross over into South Bank, then the story takes place mostly there, or will guide you towards Kurilpa Bridge, so you can go back across into the city, rather than sending you from one location to the furthest. You're always going towards the nearest ones that are hopefully not too far away.
Well, I sort of asked the guys to keep it to any one story that you took. By the time you got to the end, the distance had to be under a K.
Okay.
So it had to make sure that it was short enough that you felt like you could potentially do another story, but at the same time, it visited enough locations that you sort of got a bit of a feel.
Keeps the taxi fares down if you're really lazy.
So how long would one adventure take on average, do you think?
It takes about 30 or 40 minutes, depending on how fast you walk.
Yep. Okay, so it's pretty manageable, and you can go back and choose another path if you like as well.
Exactly, and like as we said, because the locations are only a kilometre max, that's not like a kilometre in a straight line. That's a kilometre sort of winding around streets. So generally, you'll be less than 500 metres from the start location to go back. Except if you start at the State Library of Queensland and decide to cross the bridge to do Tom or Gary's story, then I'm sorry, but you're going to be walking a little bit further.
Our original starting location was at the Square Library in the city. And so I know Gary and I used that to start, and then there was a request because of our Brisbane Writers Festival partnership that there was also a starting point at the State Library. So this happened quite late in the game. Unlike Jodie, who has experience with these matters, Gary and I said, okay, so the very first choice you make is to walk to the Square Library and go from there. So it worked out in the end.
It did. You're not walking that much further. It's fine.
Whereas my story, you can start at either library.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Street Reads is on now, is that right? Are there all the posters up? You can play the game right now if you want?
Yep, all the posters are up in their various locations. We actually put them up on Monday to make sure that none of them went missing before it started. But if we have backup plans as well, so if you have trouble finding the posters where we send you, we also actually have maps that you can do the adventure with. So you can pick up the maps from the Brisbane Square Library or from the Info Centre in Queen Street Mall. And what happens is that if one of the posters happens to be missing or vandalised, you can use the map to still read the story.
Oh, good. Yeah, good backup.
And just to recap, where do we go to begin the various adventures? Like, can you be... is there just like one poster in the State Library that you have to look for?
So the start posters are both orange, and so there is one in Redcliffe Place between the orange and yellow library cubes. So at the moment there's a bit of construction in there, so it'll be next to one of the construction walls. And then at the State Library location, it again is an orange floor graphic, and it's just near the entrance to the Knowledge Walk in the State Library and near the State Library Cafe.
And the URL for anyone who's looking for more information about Street Reads?
Streetreads.com.
Sweet. Well, guys, thanks very much for joining us on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and it sounds like a bunch of fun. We might have to get off our couches and actually do some walking. Hey, guys.
You better.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
A segue. That's good too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll be talking about The Walking Dead Season 2 next. You're listening to Z Games on Triple Z. This next one is by Nitro Fun, a Canadian act, and it's called New Game.
So, we are talking about video games, as we always do, because we're not allowed to talk about anything else. Razor and Jodie, you have been playing The Walking Dead Season 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this is an episodic game set in the universe of the comic book The Walking Dead.
That's right.
You were both big fans of the first season. I remember that you were deeply moved, each of you?
Crushed.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first season came out in 2012, and it was such a surprise. I really wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was. I just loaded up a game, and by the end of it, I was holding
Crying.
back tears
Yeah.
because the story itself was so powerful. And Telltale Games, this is their thing now. They make stories in video games, and they're kind of like choose your own adventures.
Yeah, it's surprisingly brutal. The first season was full of these tough decisions, and it was all about that element of zombie stories where you have to make hard decisions to survive. There's always a limited amount of resources, and there's always a group of people who maybe some of them aren't as useful in a crisis as others, and you can carry them some of the way, but at a certain point, maybe you'll have to make a decision about who's going to live and who's going to die, or just who's going to get the food that you have, or who's going to get the medical supplies. So it was constantly pushing you through these really hard choices.
And it wasn't like in other video games where the choice is easy. Like, am I going to be evil or am I going to be good? It's like there's two people that you've just met, and all of a sudden now you have to choose between which one of them lives and dies. It's pretty crazy and brutal.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you only have time to save one of these people, or you can only do one thing in this situation. You have two choices, decide in the next 5 seconds, and then live with that for the next 5 episodes.
Yeah, that's one of the really great things about the Telltale games is that the choices that you make in the first episode might come back and at least be remembered, and they'll haunt you for the rest of this series.
Yeah, and in this instance, choices that you made in season 1 will continue over. So you load your save file, and they'll actually have the game adapts to those choices that you make in season 2 that's just come out this year.
Oh man,
Oh man, I don't remember what. Oh, now I'm really worried because obviously the good thing about these games is that you get to read your tally at the end, and it kind of tells you how many other people around the world made the same choices as you. I feel like I was constantly in the lower group.
Yeah.
so
In that
You and-
nasty minority.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
you're
and 7% of people chopped his leg off. So
you're a sociopath,
Well,
and
now-
the video game told you so.
well, now I know. Now I'm really worried that whatever I've done is going to play out. Tell us about your story, so I'm keen to know.
Well, what's interesting about this one is there's a new protagonist. This time you're playing as Clementine, who's a 10-year-old girl. And I expected that might actually make them bring the tone down a little bit. And I was wrong, because that first episode is just like, the entire episode is saying, even though you are playing as a child now, this game is not going to get any nicer. It's really rough.
Yeah, well, the first thing you do basically when you're thrown into the game is Clementine has an injury, and she's on her own, and she's got to take care of that injury and sew herself back up, Rambo style.
Man.
And
Awesome.
you're there for every poke of the needle through the skin. You have to control all of that.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely horrifying.
All you're doing is like clicking and dragging a mouse, and I have never found that harder.
Yeah, but it's her screams. Like it's so well voice acted. Like that's what gets you sucked in. You're just like, oh my god, I can feel. I've got sympathy pains in my arm. This is horrible.
And the dialogue as well is really good throughout the series. I mean, I'm pretty sensitive to dodgy dialogue. It's really easy for me to get taken out if the dialogue doesn't seem realistic. But it's all really well written, and the characterization is superb as well. Not for a second did I think that these characters weren't real. They all acted and behaved consistently, apart from a few instances when they jumped out of character for the sake of plot. But for the most part, I was like on board with this group of characters that I felt like I knew by the end of the story.
Yeah, it introduces like a lot of new survivors. You wind up with a new group of characters, and I really liked all of them in different ways. Even the ones like the ones that you're supposed to dislike, I liked disliking them. Some of
Yeah.
them. There's always at least one jerk in every group of survivors you meet where you're like, oh, you're the one I hate. I hope you get eaten first. But then all of these conversations play out, and you talk to them, and you find out more about them, and often you have that thing of learning what happened to make them a jerk. Everybody's got some horrible story about somebody who was close to them who died, or some decision that they made that didn't pan out. And like the mark of a well-written game is how sympathetic even the unsympathetic characters are, and this does that really well.
And the story is incredibly emotional. If you've played the first season through, shadows of characters haunt this second season. without trying to, I'm
No
dodging around.
spoilers.
I am
man.
dodging
I've
like
got-
mines of spoilers here, but yeah, it's like by the time you finish season 2, if you've played season 1, I challenge you not to have tears in your eyes, especially if you get a particular ending. This time there's actually multiple endings. Like with season 1, you're pretty much on track for one particular ending, but this time the story can end in different ways depending on your choices, and a couple of the endings are absolutely gut-wrenching. Yeah.
Oh. So, depending on your choices from the first one, then, are certain people making an appearance, not just like haunting, but are they continuing on in this season, or like how did your choices actually affect? If everybody else is new, what doing what in the first one has affected what in the second season?
Well, it affects what kind of a character Clem is. Like an example that won't spoil anything. If in the first game you had someone swear around Clem, in the second game Clem will once or twice just drop a swear, even though she's like 11 years old. And if you didn't, if you actually restrained yourself around her, then she won't. But there are also much more significant ones, and there is a flashback to the first season at one point, and it's a flashback to your version of the first season,
wow.
which
Oh,
I found
cool.
really intense to go back and be like, this is that moment, these are the characters, this is just after someone has died.
Oh, and this is what you
it's-
did.
Yeah. These are the characters who are alive because of the decisions I made last time, but now I know what's going to happen to them later. So
Oh
everything
man,
was really
my
intense.
Clem's going to be a little killer then. I swore like a trooper in the first one.
Clementine is one of the greatest characters that I've ever encountered in video game storytelling. She is so cool as a character. She's 10 or 11 years old, but she's grown up in this zombie hell,
Yeah.
being like mentored by like a total badass who is like also a guy with a heart of gold as well. So she's kind of got she's had a really rough upbringing, and she's hard as nails, but at the same time, she's such a real and developed character, and she's absolutely one of my favorite heroes in video games, like ever.
You
Yeah.
love her.
You do.
I do.
Look at you getting it. There come the tears.
But you can sort of sculpt what kind of character she becomes throughout the story. So, Clementine, although she's 11, she's not naive, obviously. She can handle herself in a fight. And she is also not above using the fact that she's an 11-year-old girl as an advantage, manipulating people because people think that she's, harmless.
She's not though. She can shoot a gun well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that is surprising about it, is that it lets a small child be the hero of the story without changing it as much as you might think they would from the way the first season worked. There are a lot of characters who trust you, and so your opinions can actually change the way that your band of survivors move around, or the decisions they make, because of the experiences you've been through, and because you're innocent enough that you seem trustworthy, you do get a lot of opportunities to subtly and unsubtly steer them. So you're always at the center, even though you are like the youngest member of the group, and they do that pretty well.
Yeah.
Like in the first season, you're like a huge criminal African American guy, and everyone's sort of fearful of you. Like they're a bit.
Innocent until proven guilty. I loved him.
But this time, like, there's another contrast. You're just like a little girl, so it's kind of cool seeing the other side, like playing the other character kind of thing.
Yeah, now people think you're innocent when maybe you're not, whereas in the first season, people tended to be distrusting when they probably should have trusted you, because in so many situations, you were the smartest guy in that room.
Interesting.
So the Telltale games also, being that they are episodic, they tend to rely on reusing a lot of the same assets. Did you find that with this season, or are they actually in a position where they can bump up their production values?
Compared to the first season, it definitely has been bumped up. Especially things like the landscape. You're traveling across America, and some of the vistas were really impressive. Like, you can see these forests of pine trees and buildings in the distance, and that sort of stuff looks much better than it did in the first season. It's still the same visual style. It's still that comic booky, thick black outline character style, but it has had a bit more money obviously put into it.
Yeah, the story moves along pretty quickly as well. So there's not very many reusing the same environments over and
Oh,
over
yeah.
again, or hanging out in the same area and doing the point and click stuff. And actually, the point and click adventuring has been brought down a lot since the last game. Remember, we talked about The Wolf Among Us, and those
Yeah.
point and click adventuring elements were really scaled back, and the story and the quick time events were brought to the forefront. They've kind of done this here as well. So it's like, I remember the first season, there was it was really good, the story, but then you'd be chucked in an environment and you would be there and you had to click on 20 things before you could progress, and
That's actually why I stopped, because I was looking for one thing and I could not find it in the environment.
yeah, well, you got to put batteries in the freaking radio, you got to get medicine for the old man, and
It was the medicine. I
Yeah.
never found the keys to get into the next room, and I just went, to hell with this.
yeah, so when you're
Don't
playing
need
it like
him.
that, you're just thinking, oh man,
Good point. Should have let him die.
Should have let him go. Old, whatever.
all of that time you're just thinking, man, what is the next thing I have to do to progress the story? Like, what are the things I have to click on to get the story moving? But they've kind of realized that that's annoying, and they've changed it for the better.
Okay, so with the QuickTime events then, there's kind of a fine line there. Some of them are really good, and Telltale have done good ones in the past. But they've also had, even in The Wolf Among Us, where I thought they were really great, there were a couple where I thought I succeeded, but based on what happened next, it's kind of hard to tell whether my feedback did anything. Like, how are they in this game?
The feedback on them is excellent. I never had that feeling of, I don't know whether I succeeded or failed at this. You might be doing things like tapping to lift a piece of rubble before the zombies come, or swiping to, choose which way you run away from them, or where you hide, or which of two improvised weapons you grab to throw at a zombie's head. And all of that stuff worked really well. I hate QuickTime events a lot of the time in a lot of games, and in this they were done. Like 90% of them were great. There was maybe 2 of them that I was a bit iffy about, and considering how many of them there are, that's a really good ratio.
Yeah, wow.
There are more QuickTime events in this season than in the previous season as well. I think because they've taken out so much of the point-and-click adventure stuff, they've brought in more action and more QuickTime events. So if you're not a fan of QuickTime events, you might... This is probably something you'll notice here. Yeah.
They are well checkpointed, though, so if you do screw one up, you're never pushed back very far. You don't have to do a whole sequence of events
Oh, good.
again. You just go back like 5 seconds.
The only thing is, though, that whenever there is an action scene coming up, there'll be a little saving notification in the corner, which kind of takes you out a bit of the story. Like, it takes away some of the surprise, which is unfortunate.
So put a post-it up there or something.
Yeah. But on the plus side,
Picky much.
the QuickTime events are related to the action. So, we were talking about like how you had to sew yourself up in the start. You have to drag the mouse cursor across. So all the QuickTime events, it's not just like push X to throw a ball or something random and unrelated. All of the motions are related to what the characters are doing, which is great.
Oh,
So you're
cool.
both PC playing this then?
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
But it is also available for
everything.
everything.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering if I grab it on the consoles.
Yeah. Well, we're going to hear a quick track from the game now before we get back and sum up our thoughts on The Walking Dead Season 2. This one is called In the Pines, and it's a cover I think it was made especially for the game, Jody?
Yeah, it was recorded by Janelle Drewis for the game, but it's an old American folk song originally.
Just enough time to sort of sum up our thoughts on The Walking Dead Season 2. I really, really loved this game. It wasn't so much of a surprise this time around because I knew what I was getting into, so it didn't blow me away like Season 1, but it was still a solid continuation of the story, and I'm really glad that I spent time with it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's more even than the first season, because the first season, those early episodes where it was a bit more of a puzzle game, were a bit rough, and then it got much better as it went on and built to, like one of the best endings I've ever experienced in a game.
Ooh.
This is much more sort of in the middle, where each episode feels more like you're playing the same game rather than one that they're still tinkering with.
Yeah.
And it's a great game, but it didn't build to an ending that was quite as intense, I think, because rather than building towards this one inescapable, like this fate that you can't possibly get away from, you have like 5 different endings that you can wind up at. And so the ending that I got was really good, but it did have less of that sort of predestined feeling of like really intense emotion.
Yeah. I thought there was a little bit of a pacing issue as well. Like, the game builds towards this massive crescendo. There's this high tension, there's a high stakes situation, and it's kind of all wrapped up kind of by the end of episode 3, and then the characters kind of left to deal with the fallout of the situation for another 2 episodes. So I found like, okay, they should have had a bigger climax at the end of the entire season as opposed to having it halfway through.
I kind of liked that. It was much more about your story as Clem and who you became rather than how you dealt with the fact that some of the other survivors of the apocalypse were awful people. It was like, what have you learned from that, and are you going to become one of them?
And another thing that I didn't like about it, well, is that there was kind of an illusion of choice rather than actual choice. I mean, you're kind
Welcome to video games, right?
yeah,
Exactly.
But the thing is that it tries so hard to make you think that every decision you make is important and game defining. Whereas if you go back and have a sneaky playthrough again, you'll find out that you pretty much largely end up at the same destination no matter which choice you make.
I found some, like, replaying the first episode again and then reading the wiki to see all of the other possible outcomes. I was surprised that some of them were more divergent than I thought. At one point, there's a character who can die. In my game, she lived, and I had no idea that it was even possible for her to die until I looked up on the internet. And there were a couple of things like that, where compared to the first season, I think there's more choice. But you're right that there is still an illusion of choice in places where there isn't a real choice. Some characters are always doomed.
I got like 3 super quick questions because I know we're almost out of time. But first question, are you still in this game on your way trying to find like another survivor camp? Is that kind of why you're constantly on the move with people? Is it similar to, first round?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, look, I had all these other great questions, but I think we're pretty much out of time. Mostly,
Well, that was a really good one to end with, though, I think.
Look, most importantly, I just kind of really wanted to know when you went and tallied up your choices at the end, were most people making the same kinds of decisions as you, or?
In the early episodes, yes. By the end, me and 16% of people were doing the right thing.
Oh.
Oh, what? The right thing? It tells you you've done the right thing?
No, what I think is the right thing.
Yeah.
What the hell?
I found myself pretty much 50-50, like 2 out of the 5 choices sometimes would be I'm in the majority, and then in the next episode would be 3 out of 5. So I wasn't clearly in the majority or the minority all of the time, which I think goes to show that the choices this time aren't as cut and clear.
Yeah. Is there room for a third one?
There is the third one on the way.
It's confirmed. And these guys, Telltale Games, are also doing a Game of Thrones one next.
Yes.
What?
Which is going to be freaking sweet. Looking forward to that. And Tales of the Borderlands as well.
Which appeared at PAX recently and is apparently really, really good. So
I'm looking forward to that.
yeah, very excited.
Well, that's all we have time for this episode of Zed Games, guys. As usual, thanks for listening. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/ZedGamesAU, or go to our blog, zedgamesau.net. We're going to leave you now, before the Dykes on Mike show, with one more track. What have we got, Jody?
This is Kiro Kiro Bonito with Sick Beat.